Welcome to Watchtower History. Professor Penton, in his Apocalypse Delayed, says significantly the doctrine of the vindication of Jehovah's name was in many ways like John Calvin's doctrine of the majesty of God. It was no doubt a major factor in developing a burning, almost fanatic zeal in the witnesses of the 20th century, just as Calvin's teaching had done amongst his followers in the 16th. This meant that, like the Calvinists of that era, the witnesses became ever more intolerant of everything. And everyone not in harmony with God's new nation, the theocracy as they saw it.
That's a pretty accurate statement.
But remember, what was Rutherford's background?
Baptist.
Yeah, he was Baptist. He was Calvinist.
Which whole hellfire, condemnation, brimstone, fire.
And so it appears Penton is suggesting that he's bringing some of that into Watchtower theology through this vindication sovereignty discussion. There are a few history books that talk about this. And so the Gospel According to Jehovah's Witnesses by John Francis Coffey says, unlike Orthodox Christians, Jehovah's Witnesses believe that Satan, or the devil, singular, was alone in his rebellion against God, and that his followers, the other devils, joined him later. According to the witnesses, the rebellion of Satan and the subsequent temptation and fall of Adam put God in an embarrassing position. Could he rule all heaven and earth with the willing submission of every living person? Would the devil be able to take away the universal sovereignty of the true God? The devil boasted that he could turn all men away from God. In the Watchtower's view, the burning issue was the question of sovereignty. Because of the devil's rebellion, God had to actually vindicate his name. And so here's a quotation. In the great controversy or disagreement of thought that had now arisen to the point to be settled was not the question of power or who's the most powerful. It was the question of sovereignty in heaven and earth. Who will rule all heaven and earth and the willing submission of all living persons in heaven and earth? Satan the devil had started the first rebellion in all creation. So now, how far could he go with it? How far could he go with this rebellion in inducing other sons of God to join him? Would he and any other creatures who would join him be able to take away the universal sovereignty from the only living and true God, Jehovah? And I like the way that Coffey here answers that. He says that God's sovereignty could be jeopardized for a single moment is absurd. And the witnesses' problem is one of their own making.
That's a perfect first sentence in response to that.
He has no need to prove his sovereignty or to vindicate his name to his creatures. Sovereignty is not bestowed on God or increased because certain creatures, and this includes the devil, chose to deny it. God's supremacy is absolute, and though his sovereignty remains unaffected, it's his creatures themselves who benefit or suffer accordingly. And so it's just so strange that they think that God's sovereignty could possibly be taken away, or that anyone could even think that it could be taken away. Alan Roderson, in his book, Millions Now Living Will Never Die, A Study of Jehovah's Witnesses, says, not only do the witnesses believe that they have consistently taught the same true doctrines since the time of Russell, they also believe their role in world history is of vital importance. Throughout their literature, the words historic, epoch-making, momentous, etc. are used to describe their history. This is consistent with their theory that God and Satan are the heavenly protagonists for the minds of men, and that the only thing of importance in the world today is the presence of witnesses to Jehovah who will continue to vindicate his name. Thus, the society sees all world history in terms of this idea. For example, their explanation of the First World War, and in Jehovah's Witnesses and the Divine Purpose, they often exaggerate their own role in world affairs. He's quoting here, the evidence has been mounting to identify this body of Christians themselves as having a singular place in the divine purpose. Nor could anyone realize how comparatively small voice emanating from the modest quarters of the society could one day fill the earth with such power and strength that the very foundations on which the massive structures of Satan's entire world rested would be shaken, Had it not been for the mercy and loyal love of Jehovah, the very next few months would have been fatal for the Watchtower Society. He continues. They go so far as to claim that Satan's demons guided German bombers to attack the London Bethel, that's their headquarters in England, during the last war. To show how the demons made the London Bethel a target, in 3 months, 19 high explosive bombs have fallen within a few hundred yards of the Society's office, the nearest being across the street 30 yards away. Well, this attitude... Oh, go ahead.
A question. Were in London, England at that time, were any other German bombs falling in the city?
Mm-hmm.
So where all the other bombs, I mean, think about, I'm reasoning this through my mind. I mean, the city's being bombed.
Okay.
Are the demons bombing everybody else too? Or is it just,
And so if they're being bombed or almost bombed is an evidence that they're the chosen ones, why isn't all the other ones that are being bombed an evidence that they're the chosen ones?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there were no other bombs except the ones the demons had the Germans single you out. It's like, where do they come? But what's sad is people, their followers read this and believe it. The demons were bombing us. I'd like to comment. I have to totally agree. They believe, disagree and kind of and agree. They're always saying new light and changing things while they kind of believe their doctrines are the same. They're kind of talking out of both sides of their mouth with that, because then they have new light and it changed. So that's a contradictory of what they're saying. But I have to definitely agree that they do think they are part of history and everything going on in the world. And if they're not part of it, they'll create an Anglo-American dual world power that they have to fight. They make their own beasts that are attacking them. And when you really think about it and really read the scriptures and how those things apply, that's exactly what they're doing. If there ain't something to fight, we'll make one, So they are creating. I mean, it's like a Marvel studio, just inventing things that they have to fight. And
again, this is all based out of this discussion that we've already been having, the previous discussion of the replacement theology. In taking all of these scriptures of both Old and New Testament saying, hey, it's all about us after the First World War. And by the way, Rutherford's the one leading them after the First World War. So literally he's saying, it's all about me. And we saw in the last discussion, he says, well, I don't want to be egotistical, but he goes on and it says, it's all about me in the article about the new nation. All right, Rogerson continues. While this attitude might be justified by the witnesses' overall conception of history, they sometimes assume that people in the outside world see life in the same way. They evidently wish people to regard them as important emissaries of God rather than an obscure sect.
That's true and well worded.
Yeah. Rutherford introduced the idea of passing resolutions at international assemblies, including indicting the clergy, businessmen, or some other powerful group. Recently, the witnesses went so far as distributing millions of copies of a public address specifically to clergymen and businessmen throughout the world. While it's easy for unbelievers to laugh at the witnesses' aspirations, their attitude is consistent with their sincere belief that there are only two important groups of people in the world today, those for Jehovah and those against him. We have seen that logically the witnesses should not expect their history to substantiate this idea. Of course, they believe it does. So the crux of this discussion lies in the credibility of their doctrines. If the witnesses can build a convincing case from the Bible, then they may well be justified in overlooking the discrepancies and contradictions inherent in their historical development. But if their doctrines don't meet that from the context, because they're misconstruing their history, then they're pointing to their history that isn't their history, isn't in evidence, and so therefore the replacement theology doesn't work.
You nailed it.
Andrew Holden, in his book Jehovah's Witnesses, Portrait of a Contemporary Religious Movement, says that former witness autobiographies invariably convey the emotional anxiety of people who have spent a considerable number of years in the organization before discovering the real Christ. The following two accounts demonstrate this clearly. Luke 4, 18 and 19 opened up a whole new vision of Jesus' ministry for me. I had believed that his primary objective in coming to earth was to vindicate Jehovah's name. But now I notice the force of the word because in the passage. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. Not a word about vindicating Jehovah's name. Gradually my eyes were open. Lord, I cried, forgive me for making you a liar. All right.
And
so
that, again, that's a key word, the gospel.
Yeah.
The gospel is not vindicating Jehovah's name.